Welcome to the Priority Zero podcast. Stories of service.
Welcome to the Priority Zero podcast. My name's Oresty, and I'm very excited to have you guys with us today because today we have Jeff Buteux with us. Jeff is an intensive care paramedic with St. John Ambulance and also a flight paramedic and was an ex-combat medic with the Army in South Africa. Jeff, welcome to the podcast, mate.
Morning, Norris. How's it going?
I'm doing great, mate. I'm really excited to have you on. We had a little bit of a chat before you came on just about your experience in your past, and to be honest, I'm blown away, by everything you've done and the experience that you had. I'm really excited to get this one out to share it with our audience. Can you start off by telling us a little bit about your upbringing and where you're from?
Yeah, sure. I was born in England. We migrated to South Africa in about 75, did my schooling there. Was interested in first aid and joined St. John's as a volunteer in South Africa. When I got my conscription, so 2 years military conscription, fortunately, I was actually pulled into the Army medics. I say fortunately, it was just a bit of a passion, but it was 2 years conscripted into the medical services, and that was my first taste of pre-hospital healthcare.
Yeah, that's awesome. Can we talk a little bit about you being a volunteer over there with St. John?
Very limited involvement. It was just something that just a passion or an interest, more of an interest in those early days. I was with the Scouts and we did first aid, and St. John's was, in the same town, and they had the requirement for volleys and everything else. So that was right in the very beginning, early days, and not much involvement.
Yeah, but what sort of things did you do with St. John? Were they, like I spoke to in one of our other episodes, James Stewart, so he started off as a volunteer, and a lot of the St. John volunteers over in New Zealand actually got to go on emergency ambulances, where here in the NT they're more events based. Do you know what it was like over there?
So I was probably 12 years of age, juniors. It was just learning and getting certificates and enjoying and socializing.
Yeah, so more of the cadet program.
More of the cadet program.
Yeah, perfect. And that kind of inspired you to go down the route of medical, yeah?
That's it, yeah.
Perfect. All right, let's talk a little bit about your time in the South African military. You said you got conscripted. So did you just get a letter in the mail one day and gone,
yeah,
oh crap?
It was quite crazy. Sort of planning my life. I was actually doing medical technology and just got a letter to say I'm now a naturalized citizen. I now have to do 2 years of military service and 3 months basic training. And after that, ended up doing operational medical orderly instructor, which is another 9 months of training. And that was pretty intense. That was good. It was in the hospitals. It was a lot of trauma, a lot of training, and thoroughly enjoyed that course, which ultimately was to put me as an instructor for operational medical orderlies. And that didn't happen either, because at the end of the training, we got put on a plane and sent up to the so-called border and put into the bush war.
Before we get into your operational experience within that, how did you find the basic training going into the South African military?
Well, 3 months basic training, it was tough. It was, they had a large intake, so all of the rooms and accommodation and everything else was all sort of insufficient. And I slept in a tent for 3 months with another 9 guys, and just basic training, physical instruction. That was it. It was just learning to be a soldier, rough, tough, and ready. And it was in the place called Potchefstroom, which is pretty similar to South WA. So very, very cold. We had ice on our tent in the morning. But it was 3 months of basic training, and it is what it is.
Can we talk about you, once you finish your basic training, going into your unit, what you experienced, going from basic to actually doing the job?
Yeah, sure. So the training was at Baragwanath Hospital. Some of it was there, in hospital service training. And we were into ED, learning how to suture, learning how to reduce fractures, put on plaster cast, assisting in theatre, doing airway, and just getting exposed in quite a bit of detail to a lot of the trauma. Not so much big cardiology sort of understanding or pathophysiology, because soldiers are all young, fit and healthy, but it was more of a focus on trauma. And that was probably about 4 months on and off while doing driving, counter operations, insurgency, weapons, and all of the other modules within operational medical orderly instructor.
Perfect. And so you do that for 4 months, your training. Once you got signed off, I'm guessing you got sent to a unit. Can you tell me about some of your experiences in that?
I wish I got sent to a unit. We got marched off the parade ground, put onto an aeroplane and sent straight up to the bush war. Fortunately, I say fortunately, there were 3 of us that were put onto helicopters. So my role was working with a doctor and paramedic or army medic, and it was 2 medical crew in a Super Puma, and day 1 was 20 patients in the back of the helicopter, and people getting blown up and put into the deep end. So I did that for 3 months, working out of Ondangwa Air Force Base in Southwest Africa. So not much face-to-face combat until it was time to go home, and there was only 2 seats and 3 people, and I got the short straw. So I was stuck I remained up in the region for another 4 months, but for those 4 months I was on foot patrol in the bush and getting contact every other day as a medic.
Yeah, what was going through your head through these situations?
Hard. It is. It's hard to describe. It's it's something I don't want anyone to experience. I don't want my kids. I don't want my mates or anyone to experience that sort of rubbish. It's a war. We didn't know what we were fighting for. We were just we were young and dumb and put on given a gun and put into the bush, and you are fighting these people, and you're fighting for your country. So you kind of you do what you think you're doing is right. I didn't want to shoot anyone. Didn't want to, but you're put into a situation, and as a medic you kind of think, okay, I'm not going to shoot anyone, I'm going to help and fix people. And we did that too, and it was just gunshots and bombs and ballistics. So good exposure from a life skill or a healthcare provider, but something that's not proud or I got medals and everything else, but it's defend or war is what it is. It's not a good thing. Is it necessary? Do you put young kids into that environment? No, you shouldn't, but whether it's right or wrong.
Yeah, experiences, I suppose. It is what it is. Different times back then.
Totally.
Definitely different times. Something I'm very happy that we don't have that kind of thing happening in Australia, where I guess we're very lucky because we're secluded from a lot of it, and it still happens around the world, but we're just so far away from it.
Well, I mean, there's the Bush War, that was, Angola, and in hindsight, I found out that, it was all funded by America and the CIA for the oil, and it was to disrupt the Angolan government. So in hindsight, I was pretty pissed off that was the reason that we were fighting in a bush war, disrupting the Angolan government for oil. Ultimately, that's what it was.
Resources.
Living in South Africa on its own has its own challenges, and that's sort of what happened after the Defence Force. Joined a government service and worked my way up the ranks to intensive care paramedic level.
Yeah, beautiful. It's a fun fact. My grandparents, during the war in Greece, to escape the war, they actually went and lived in the Congo for 2 years.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's crazy. So after this 2-year term that you spent in the military in Africa, what was your next move after that? Where did you go?
So, I said I joined Benoni Fire Service, so fire and ambulance service. It was a government emergency services. It was a town probably twice the size of Darwin. We had 4 stations, both fire and medical, and started right at the very bottom on day 1. But having the training and the experience and the exposure of defence, getting into the back of an ambulance probably wasn't a brand new experience, but worked my way up the ranks on both fire and medical, and got to a point in my career where I said, okay, I'm going to go 100% medical and forget the fire services. Was a single responder, pretty similar to what I'm doing for St John's up here, working as an intensive care paramedic, as a single responder, backing up all of the other crews. Yeah,
very cool. Can we talk about some of your experiences or the differences working in South Africa to working in Australia? Some of the case differences that you see?
I'd say completely different. I mean, healthcare is healthcare, but a lot more trauma. There was a lot of disparity between rich and poor and black and white, and there was an intense amount of crime, and we saw that on a daily basis. And then also, for some weird reason, there was higher speeds, more crashes, more people getting hurt, lack of regulation for seatbelts or speeding. So, but people got hurt quite substantially, Also the population, Johannesburg, right in the very middle of Johannesburg, you're probably talking over 1 million people, definitely a lot more now. Or in Benoni, it was probably in excess of 1 million. And the exposure to trauma, gunshots, stabbings, domestic violence was a lot more than the medical sort of component, as opposed to cardiacs or I say that something else that's highlighted difference in Australia and South Africa was childbirth or maternity, obstetrics. So we had really, really good training with the obstetrics, and before you actually hit the road as a qualified paramedic, you have to deliver 10 babies in a obstetric unit. And then as an intensive care paramedic, you have to deliver 30 complications, so multiple births, cord prolapses, everything and anything. But before you hit the road as a qualified, you need to have 30 complicated sign-offs. And you deliver a lot more. And I'm not sure, probably less clinics, more population. And the larger Johannesburg ambulance service, probably less vehicles. So people are waiting for ambulances a lot longer and ending up delivering babies in the back of an ambulance or at home.
Yeah, right. Do we find that in those places people are getting a lot less care, like prenatal care during their pregnancies, not going for their checkups, their scans?
Yeah, so there are clinics, prenatal clinics, but people just don't attend them, and they'll sort of call an ambulance when they have contractions. So yeah, a lot less prenatal planning, a lot less care. Whether it's it's education or rural, it's probably a bit of both. And unfortunately, that is the way it is. Hasn't changed.
Hasn't changed, yeah. All right. From there, how long did you spend in the service there in South Africa?
Yeah, so I was with the government service for, I'm not sure exactly, probably 5-6 years, and then I went to a private service. Second paramedic employed in a new national medical service provider.
Perfect. And what sort of things did you do in that service? What was the difference between going to government than going to a private service?
Well, the massive difference is funding. So government has very, very limited funding versus the private services that had the money, that had the right equipment and the resources and logistics to provide really good first world healthcare. And I think that that's what I did. I joined a service, and we initiated and started a national ambulance service. Although we didn't actually own the ambulances, we subcontracted those out, but we had ICPs in all of the major towns with single response vehicles and backed up by helicopter. So we had 5 helicopters and single response units. 1 or 2 of the services we actually had ambulances. In fact, we even broke out into Botswana, Namibia, so Southern Africa. It wasn't just South Africa. After probably about 6 years, we spread further north because there was a demand for private health in the countries north of South Africa. And, we had fixed-wing aeroplanes and medical retrieval, although that wasn't under my portfolio. I looked after the helicopters and the ambulance services.
How often were you getting called out in these helicopters? Was this an everyday occurrence or once in a while?
Every day. We probably had about 50 hours a month, and so the helicopters we had were single engine. They weren't twins, so we only flew daytime, and they were from 6 in the morning till 6 at night, and pretty much every single day, 12 hours of picking up patients. Each helicopter was based at a level 1 medical facility for the crews. So it was a doctor paramedic crew and all the right equipment, ventilators. I say all the right equipment. Back in those days, we probably the best ventilator was an Oxylog 2000, and that's just pressure and volume, rate and volume. So compared to the equipment that we've got today, much better today.
Yeah,
but single engine helicopters, working 50 hours a month, so quite busy.
Yeah, you mentioned that there was a big funding difference between the private and the public systems. Yeah. What was the equipment like between the two? Like going from the government system, what was your equipment like?
Big comparative, big difference. Just a box of gloves in the back of the government hospital ambulance, you'll be lucky. That was probably definitely in there. 1 box of gloves, but soft collars, you might be lucky if you got soft collars. We used to use BVMs and wash them. I mean, it was the ambu reusable bag. We didn't have disposables right way back then. But laryngoscopes, you'd wash the laryngoscope blade. You'd reuse some of the equipment in the government environment. In the private, you had the money, you had the funding, and we were buying disposable items because it was the best practice.
Yeah, wow. It must have been a big shock going from one to the other, seeing the resources you had in the government and then going to that private sector and going, wow, I've got everything that I need here.
I think that, it just makes there's a big difference between government service and private service. There's 2 really big national ambulance services in South Africa, and then you've got the government service, and complete black and white, chalk and cheese.
Now, I know South Africa at the time was quite a violent place. I know you grew up in the time of Nelson Mandela, and there was a lot of unrest during that time. Now, I've heard a rumour, now I don't know if it's true, that some paramedics carry handguns.
Yeah, we did. We actually had like a utility vest, and in that utility vest we would have a little pouch specially designed for whatever firearm you were carrying. And then, some of the communities that we went to, they sort of said, why are your guys carrying firearms? And we said, well, for protection, because we're getting shot at, or there's high risk environment, and we don't want to enter into those. But when you get put into a high risk environment where there is firearms and you'll get a gun pointed at you, the last thing you want to do is pull it out and start a gunfight. But the guys did carry firearms, and the community sort of said, well, you guys stop carrying firearms because you're there to provide emergency health. They said, yeah, sure, we'll do that. Just stop shooting at us.
Yeah, plain and simple.
And, those utility vests, we used to have Kevlar or ceramic plates in. So it was also the bulletproof vest.
And that's unheard of here.
It is, yeah. I mean, it's completely different. We'd get shot at, get guns pointed at your head. I was in the back of an ambulance, and guy jumped in the back and pulled out a gun and said, if he dies, you die. And I said, no, he's still alive. Look. Meantime, he's stone cold dead. But I had the ECG leads running across my leg, and I'm flicking the ECG leads to create some complex on the monitor, and flicking it at a rate of my fingers
as fast as you can.
120 a minute. But I said, look, no, he's alive. He's got a heartbeat. And he put the gun down and stayed in the back of the ambulance until we got to the hospital. Yeah, it was frightening.
Wow, that's I don't even know what to say to that. Jesus. And did that sort of occurrence happen often?
It's normal. It's a daily basis. It's you'll get guns. You'll get not so much knives, but it was a lot of guns. You'd get shot at, and it was violence against people wanting to shoot their own whatever people in the environment. I don't know what to say. Black and black. That's probably the easiest thing. Black and black, white and white. It doesn't matter. But they wanted to shoot each other, and we were in. We didn't want to get in the way, but when people get shot, they call for an ambulance, and we had to go pick them up. We didn't go into, as I said, dangerous environments. We stood off. We held off on the side. You couldn't wait for police. There was insufficient police resources. So, we'd sort of wait for another vehicle to come along. We did change policies and look at, safety and take everything into account. But, there are times that it was uncontrollable and too many guns.
Yeah, because that was going to be my next question. Like, if there's any safety concerns up here, we hold off the ambulance, we pull them off to a safe distance away, stage them in an area and wait for police, and, then we go in together.
Yeah, big difference.
Yeah, but obviously you guys don't have that option, and it must be hard knowing someone's in there that needs your help and you can't go in.
Up here in Darwin, yeah. I mean, it's at times I do question, there's a stabbing or someone's been calling for medical assistance, and we waiting for police for up to 40 minutes, and where are they and what's happening, or do they have the resources available? And I question, should we be going in maybe in numbers?
Yeah, safety in numbers, yeah.
Safety in numbers. or just call back and just get more information, and the perpetrator's still there. But I do believe it's a good policy. It's something that protects and saves and looks after our crew, and that's the most important thing.
Yeah, 100%. All right, so what did you do after you spent? How many years did you spend in this government service? The private service.
Private service. I probably left around about 1998. So yeah, probably just on 7-8 years was with the private service, and then I actually started my own event company, medical events, ambulance service. We had a couple of pre-hospital service provider contractors. So we had an intensive care single response unit helping out with security companies, so providing medical cover to their clients, and at the same time opened up a medical service sales for pre-hospital equipment. So we built ambulances and we supplied pre-hospital medical equipment.
Can you talk to me about one of your most memorable experiences on an event that you went to? I know you mentioned something before about the World Cup.
Yeah, 1995 Rugby World Cup, 30 days before kickoff, I got called into the boardroom, and it was like, Jeff, we looking after the players. When they touch down on the ground, it's our responsibility. And it was like every single team, every single player. So it was doctors and nurses and paramedics on a national plan to look after all the players from when they landed at the airport, staying at the hotels and on the field. So it was a logistical nightmare, but it was challenging, it was fun. And South Africa won the World Cup.
Happy days. Let me pause.
And we didn't poison the Kiwis.
You guys won that year, I take it. Any other memorable moments that we can touch on throughout your career that you're happy to share, whether it's good or bad?
I think there's lots. There's lots of memorable moments. Point one out. I think the bottom line is a good outcome. It may be challenging for me as an individual, either physically, emotionally, mentally, even physically, or not physically, but medically, having to think on my feet. There's a multitude of different sort of examples, but I think there's always that good job that we talk about. That was a great job, and you kind of think to yourself, well, the person was half dead, or they got their arm ripped off, and how can you call that a good job? We worked well, we worked as a team, we did all the right things, and the person lived. And that is defined in the pre-hospital environment as that's a good job. There's many different good stories, I suppose, but that's the best if there's a good outcome.
Obviously, we're recording this, in my house in Darwin. What brought you to Darwin? How did you get from South Africa to Darwin?
Yeah, well, after I left medical rescue, and started my own companies, I was actually flying for international SOS on the fixed wing side. I was flying for the ER-24 and Netcare 911, the two private helicopters, and I was also flying on what we called Echo 1, the government helicopter service. So enjoying life, working my own business, and then casual freelancing for various other companies and services, and one of those was offshore. So for a period of time I went offshore for SOS onto an oil rig, and my back-to-back was from Darwin, and I sort of we had a good interaction. He was out there for probably about 2 years. I probably only did 1 year with him at the same time, back-to-back, and I got an interest into Australia probably after my divorce. So then, okay, well, I'll head off over to Australia. I've had a bit of a calling a couple of times, but nothing ever happened. And then this guy actually phoned me up and said, hey, you've applied at QAS. What's happening with that? And I said, yeah, no, it's all good. I'm going ahead and I've been accepted, and I'm just going to go over for my visa. And he said, well, do you want to come to Darwin? And I said, where's Darwin? And basically I had an interview and got a job offer for St John Ambulance NT.
Did you do any research on Darwin? Did you know what you were walking into?
Yeah, I did. Very little. I mean, did I do research? Not enough.
What did you know about Darwin when you came?
No, I think, the thing about Darwin was, it was tropical. It's 12 degrees south of the equator. So we knew the environment and the humidity, and didn't know that we could not swim in the sea. I think if we knew that, probably wouldn't have come. But didn't realise the number of crocs. But otherwise, it's been great. It is a small town. I think St John Ambulance NT. There's challenges in the service. It's diverse. It's remote. But we've got regions or branches all over the place, and like any service in the world, there's the logistics of remote locations. What funding have you got, and what services can you offer? So it's challenging no matter where you go in the world, and Darwin has exactly the same as everywhere else.
Yeah, exactly. Just because of the vast distances between places, we do a lot of work with remote clinics and Care Flight and Royal Flying Doctors and SES, and at times call for the assistance of police and fireys as well. So there's definitely challenges here, but I think we work really well together with all those organisations. Yeah. Going from South Africa and coming to Darwin when you started with the ambulance service, obviously there's a lot of challenges over in South Africa that we just don't have here. Clinically, how did you find it coming to the NT ambulance service?
So from South Africa, not just all the home invasions and those sort of things, and the violence and the intensity of the crime, we had 12 hours of intense trauma. Compared to Darwin, coming here, and this is 14 years ago, it was not quite as busy as what we are now, but I've never seen that intense trauma that we had on a daily basis in South Africa. So Darwin, for me, is very relaxed. Pretty much compared to where I came from, I can honestly say, a 12-hour shift is a holiday. I know it's work, but the intensity of the crime, the volume, and you'd have 12 hours of intense trauma, whereas in Darwin, you'd have good clinical cases and a lot of medical comorbidities, and not so much trauma. Although Darwin is supposed to be the trauma capital of Australia, we do get good trauma.
Compared to the rest of Australia,
to the rest of Australia. You get gunshots in Sydney, but we don't often get gunshots in Darwin. It's nice, it's comforting to actually work in an environment where my skill set is given to people that need it, who have the medical complaints and conditions, and a little bit of trauma thrown in every now and then, and that happens. Accidents happen. Compared to South Africa, how can I compare that? I sort of said South Africa is like 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10 in intensity, and in comparison, Darwin was probably 0.5.
So massive difference.
Massive difference.
Did you find yourself when you come over here feeling that you were de-skilling at all?
Well, from the clinical scope, there was probably 60% less scope. So de-skilling, we try and maintain those skills, but from a scope of practice, definitely there was 60% less skills that we were doing in South Africa that we couldn't do in Australia.
Can you give me a couple of them, what they were?
Well, I'm talking 14 years ago. So John Ambulance NT, you couldn't synchronise cardiovert, you couldn't RSI, you couldn't finger thoracostomy, surgical crack. Those are just some of the things that we couldn't do 14 years ago. Saying that, St John NT is now on par, I think, with the rest of the world. We have a really good high-fidelity medical team, the ICPs, and our scope of practice now in the territory is on par with the rest of the world.
Fantastic. Now, I know this is going a little bit back, but when we had a little talk last time, you did mention that you did a lot of stuff in fixed wings and helos, and you were involved in a few crashes. Can we touch on that?
Yeah, okay. So fixed wing, lost our, lose landing gear on takeoff, hitting animals on the runways, eagles flying into engines, aquaplaning on runways, going off the runway and losing all your undercarriage, never ever hitting a brick wall, otherwise I wouldn't be here. Helicopter, lost the tail rotor, probably on one occasion, I think it was. Dirty fuel and wind. So, and in a helicopter you auto rotate if you have altitude and forward speed. I'm not a pilot. I've done more than enough hours in rotary and fixed wing, and unfortunately, bounced a few times in the helicopters. So auto-rotated onto the ground probably about 3 times and bounced twice.
What's some of the challenges that flight medics or paramedics face, being in the air rather than on the ground?
I think the biggest thing is, you're in a confined space at altitude. If something happens, you can't stop or you can't pull over to put up another IV. So when you're in paramedical retrieval, it's critical that you stabilize your patient prior to packaging. Don't put up 1 IV, put up 2, not just for shits and giggles, but it's good practice. And altitude, if it's not a free-flowing IV, they get pulled out. They do get occluded if they're not being used. So it's not just the IVs, but it's a matter of stabilizing your patient and then package. Because when you transport, you're in a confined space, but limited. You don't have that 360 access to your patient, and you can't pull over. You need to be prepared for anything and everything.
I suppose backup as well. It's not as easy to get you back up in the sky, is there?
Well, you can always ask a pilot to come help, but then who's going to fly the plane?
Exactly. What's some of the training that you can expect to receive when you're working on these planes and aircrafts?
So there's aviation medical diplomas that are available. Charles Darwin have got one. There's also, you need certain tickets, a BOSIET, which is a basic offshore survival. And that's basically HUIT, helicopter emergency underwater training, at least that. So the BOSIET is for oil and gas. You need a medical, fit and healthy, so aviation medical. You need a CASA familiarization on whatever aircraft you're flying on. Australia is catching up with the rest of the world as far as CASA medical regulation. There is there are organisations in Australia who are promoting best practice, and that's not just from the medical perspective, but that's also from the aviation perspective. So 1 pilot versus 2 pilots. It's an extra set of eyes. Do you need IFR versus or single engine versus twin engines? Best practice. You got to be putting in someone's child in an incubator at 20,000 feet, flying them 800 miles. You don't want to do it in the back of a cowboy's little caravan that he uses on the weekend. So there's insurance aspects, there's medical legal aspects, there's a whole lot of things that need regulation from an aviation point of view and from a medical perspective. So from treating a patient in the back of an airplane or a helicopter, it is different because you can't pull over and you need to stabilize, treat, package, and then transport. And then from a CASA perspective, there needs to be regulation, the right equipment, the right brackets for the event that you do crash, and all of the equipment's not sitting on the floor or on the patient's leg or loose in the back. It needs to be properly regulated and the right equipment for the right job. And it's not like that at the moment.
Fair enough. And obviously you flew on these helos, especially because you did some time on the oil rigs as well. Talk to me about the oil rigs. What kind of situations did you see on these oil rigs as a medic?
So working on oil rig as a paramedic, it sounds glorious. You jump on a helicopter and you fly to the oil rig, and most swings are 4 weeks on, 4 weeks off. And it's primary healthcare. There's not so much emergency medicine unless something goes wrong big. And you're then on your own with maybe 1 or 10 patients who are critically ill and injured. So it's a different perspective. It's a casual, easy, relaxed. That's what it sounds like. Casual, easy, relaxed job for 4 weeks out on an oil rig, looking after holes, sore throats, and
cough, colds, and sore holes, as they say.
Right? But the medic has other functions. It's not just seeing patients, and you're on call 6 till 6 at night, and then technically you're in your room sleeping when you're off duty or not in the clinic. Yet if someone is sick, they're going to come and wake you up and drag you out of bed and say help, and you're going to perform your role.
So essentially you're working 24 hours a day for 4 weeks straight.
Yeah, you're on call 24/7 straight. And you've got other jobs. Depending on the rig, you've got to do the bed allocation. You help the health and safety guy with helicopter inductions, rig inductions, water checks, checking all the first aid kits, And you start talking about the Prelude, which is the largest boat ever manufactured on the water. I think I recall something like 13 floors, and every second floor has got an AED in, and a first aid kit in the stairwell. And that's not just, then you've got various officers and amongst the entire, around the whole ship. And that's the medic's responsibility, is to check that, it's a first aid kit. And those things get used and they expire. And you've got to do the right thing and check that first aid kit, not just tick a box, because there's people relying on those little first aid kits. And, if they can put a Band-Aid on or not come to the clinic and wake you up at 2 o'clock in the morning and look after themselves, that's better for you, I suppose. Saying that things have changed as well. So reporting medical incidences, before we used to, the industry used to sort of bury or not report a medical case because it was bad on statistics. We've done a full 360 degrees. Every single person that has some inkling of a medical concern is reported, because it's managed and it's monitored, and it's, we're looking after the workforce. That's changed over the years for a good reason.
Yeah. Did you get much cabin fever, like people going to these things for the first time and being stuck on the rig for 4 weeks? And
so, in perspective, I've probably done maybe 4 or 5 years of rig work, and cabin fever in the North Sea, you're talking rosters of 4 days on, 3 days off, because 4 weeks on, 4 weeks off for West Africa, Australia, although Australia's now moved predominantly 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. But you do get stuck on these things, especially in Darwin, off the coast of Darwin, because of cyclones and the helicopters can't take off. So you do get people who overstay. Unfortunately, they can't get off, or their back-to-back is sick and they cannot leave the rig. And you'll get people 7-8 weeks, and we do mental health checks on those. So anyone over 4 weeks does get a regular mental health check for that cabin fever. But you also do get the odd individual who, after 10 days would start freaking out and getting a bit of cabin fever, and offshore is not meant for them. Yeah,
that's it. I suppose, especially that first, stint that you go to will kind of weed those people out, I guess. Let's talk a little bit about your current role. You're a current intensive care paramedic for St. John Ambulance.
I'm in a casual role at the moment. I've been casual with St. John's for about 2 years, working for another service on the helicopters, doing standby for STS. But St. John Ambulance, a really, really great bunch of guys. And as I said, right up there with the rest of the world as far as the scope of work. And I think, there's been a lot of changes, a lot of positive move, and the crews are absolutely fantastic. So in a casual role, I probably would like to do more than one shift every 2 weeks, but I predominantly work on the single response, so on CRU. I have the option of working on an ambulance, but it's just a matter of my availability, and if there's any shifts on CRU, that's my first preference. And I think I say, the crews are fantastic. There's a lot of desire to want to learn, and I think that's one of the things that I enjoy is disseminating that knowledge and helping and guiding, mentoring in the clinical environment.
I know a lot of people are thankful. I know a lot of paramedics that work with you, and you've taken them under their wing and taught them, and they're really appreciative, especially of the experiences you've had, in South Africa versus Australia. So you've given these guys a wealth of knowledge, and something they're very much thankful for. Just touching on those experiences, I want to talk a little bit about resilience, because you've had such a varied career. You've seen a lot of trauma. What's some of the things that you do to stay so resilient and keep yourself in check?
Something I always say is you never get used to the idea of the severity of the trauma. You get used to the idea of getting used to it. You'll never ever get that out of your head or out of your system. It's something that we're exposed to, we see and we experience. And I think, as you say, what do we do as individuals to get through that? And I think the most important thing is having a mentor or a person to speak to, a friend, a shoulder. And we say, to each other, "Oh, you're okay." I think the biggest thing is when someone turns around and says, "No, I'm not." we don't know what to say after that. I've got friends here in Australia, in Darwin, who I can phone up and I can talk to, and we really, expose ourselves. We exceptionally, there's professional courtesy, but it's more about, brotherhood, friendship. We've all experienced certain things that, and you get different triggers for different people. So I think the most important thing is bouncing off your mates. That's important. And you'll find, which ones probably listen better, or experience or give you the right answers or make you feel more comfortable. I've got a voice or a shoulder that I lean on back in South Africa as well. And this guy just asks me all these funny questions and gory questions and gets me to talk and vent and get it off my chest, and literally prompts and promotes me to get rid of whatever emotions I'm holding back. And, we don't ever want to hold back on those emotions. We don't want to keep them. We don't want to store them. We don't want to hang on to something that's traumatized us in one way or another. So I think it's important to get that off your chest, to get it out in whichever way you feel most comfortable doing. Some people have regular counselling sessions with professionals. If that works for you, that's great. Other people, I like closing my eyes and just zoning out completely. Call it meditating if you want. And some people read books. Some people sing songs. There's many different ways that, however you want to get rid of that stress or those anxieties or those emotions. But the most important thing is don't hang on to them.
Wise words there. Finally, can we get some words of advice for people that are looking to come, into the healthcare industry, more specifically paramedics?
Yeah, so Darwin's got, we've got Flinders, we've got Charles Darwin University. It doesn't matter where you study, it's a degree. St John Ambulance NT has the opportunity for work experience and getting really good exposure with with a really good scope of practice, with all the right equipment, and more importantly, probably with a fantastic team of people, and that makes the difference. The guys that you work with, it's a career that's challenging. You're in the back of a moving box for 12 hours. You're getting abuse from various different angles. You're seeing highly stressed. You're exposed to all of these different factors. And we go home and sit down with our kids at night and, be all happy and friendly. But getting back into the mental health part, but, it's someone who wants to get into this industry. They need to be resilient. They need to be humble. I think that's an important word. There's a lot to learn, and it's a continuous learning process of life skills and people skills, and more importantly, more you learn about yourself, and I think you do become more and more humble as time goes by. And it's not a glorified position. It's not, you're not doing it for your ego. You're doing it to help other people in dire situations.
Yeah, so doing it for the right reasons.
Yeah,
I think it's very important. Well, thank you very much for coming on the podcast and, sharing these stories with us. I think you've provided a really good insight, on your career and given some really good advice for people. So I really appreciate it, Jeff.
I appreciate the opportunity and best of luck with the podcast, because you're doing a great thing.
Thanks, mate. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for tuning into the Priority Zero podcast. We greatly appreciate your dedicated listenership. If you are interested in being featured as a guest on our show, we welcome you to reach out to us through our official channels on Facebook or Instagram. Alternatively, you can contact us via email at contact@priorityzero.com.au. We value your support in helping us spread these compelling stories to a wider audience. Kindly consider liking and sharing these episodes, as it plays a crucial role in our mission to reach as many people as possible.